There's a specific kind of silence that follows a decision no one teaches you how to make. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that sits heavy in your chest at 2 a.m. when you're wondering if you made the right call. The kind that shows up uninvited every holiday season, every birthday, every time someone asks you a question that seems simple but isn't. And you already know the question I'm talking about. So, how's your family? 4 words. And somehow they carry the weight of an entire life you've had to quietly grieve. Picture this. You're sitting at someone else's table. Maybe it's a friend's home, maybe a partner's family gathering. The room is loud. Someone's arguing about something that doesn't matter. A kid knocks over a drink. A grandmother is telling the same story she tells every year. And everyone around you is rolling their eyes, laughing, sighing, doing that messy, complicated dance that families do. And you're watching all of it from the outside. Not because you weren't invited somewhere, but because the place you were supposed to belong, you chose to leave. Or maybe it left you first. Or maybe the line between those two things got so blurry over so many years that you honestly can't tell anymore. Someone turns to you with a warm smile and asks, "Where's your family? Are they coming later?" And you smile back. You say something vague, something that closes the door politely without making anyone uncomfortable. Because the real answer? The real answer takes too long. It requires context that most people aren't prepared for. It requires you to explain years of history in 30 seconds to someone who is just making conversation, so you don't. You just carry it quietly, the way you've always carried it. Here's what most people never get to hear, though. The people who cut off their families are almost never the ones who gave up easily. They are, almost always, the ones who tried the longest. Let that sit for a second. We live in a world that treats family like it's sacred ground. Blood is thicker than water. You only get one mother. Family is everything. These phrases get repeated so often they start to feel like facts instead of what they actually are, which is stories. Stories we inherited. Stories that were handed down to us before we were old enough to question them. And because those stories run so deep, when someone steps away from their family, the world's first instinct is to assume something must be wrong with them. They must be selfish, dramatic, ungrateful, cold. But what if the story is the exact opposite? What if the person who walked away is someone who loved deeply, tried repeatedly, stayed far longer than was healthy, and finally, only after everything else failed, made the hardest choice of their life? Think about someone. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you know. Someone who spent their entire 20s driving hours every holiday to sit at a table where they felt completely invisible. Not hated. Invisible. There's a difference, and that difference matters more than people realize, because being hated is at least honest. Being invisible is something else entirely. It's sitting in a room full of people who share your blood and feeling like you're watching it all through glass. Like you're there, but you don't quite count. Like your presence is acknowledged, but your actual self, the one underneath the role you're expected to play, is not welcome. Every conversation eventually circled back to what they hadn't done yet, who they still hadn't become, why they still weren't quite enough. And yet, every year, they went back. Because hope is a brutal thing, especially when it's pointed at the people who raised you. And then one year, quietly, without any dramatic announcement, they just didn't go. And the world didn't end. But the grief that followed, that felt like every kind of ending at once. A researcher named Dr. Carl Pillemer at Cornell University spent years studying family estrangement, and what he found completely upends what most of us assume. He discovered, over and over, that people who cut off a parent or sibling describe it not as a single explosion, but as a long, slow erosion. Not one moment, not one unforgivable thing. Years of trying, years of hoping, conversations that went nowhere, apologies that never came. The same pattern playing out again and again. Like a song you've asked someone to stop playing, but they keep putting back on. And eventually, at some point that's almost impossible to pinpoint, the math just changed. The cost of staying became higher than the cost of leaving. Not dramatically, Not all at once. Just one quiet day, it shifted. That's not giving up. That's someone who has thought this through more times than you can imagine, carried more than most people ever see, and finally, after everything, chose themselves. Here's the part that cuts deepest. When people cut off family, they don't just grieve once. They grieve in waves, in seasons, in unexpected moments. They mourn the parent they needed but never had. The sibling relationship that could have been warm and easy but wasn't. The version of family that seemed to exist everywhere else, in movies, in other people's homes, just somehow not in their own. That grief doesn't disappear just because the relationship ended. If anything, it sometimes gets louder in the absence, because now there's no noise to distract you from it. But here's what surprises people. Here's the part that almost no one talks about because it doesn't fit the narrative we've been given. Many people who step away from a toxic family describe something they genuinely didn't expect. Quiet. Not numbness, not indifference. Actual quiet. Like a hum they'd lived with so long they'd forgotten it was there finally stopped. And in that quiet, for the first time in years, they could hear their own thoughts, their own needs, their own voice. That doesn't sound like someone who destroyed something. That sounds like someone who finally got to breathe. Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it. Have you ever tried to explain to someone why a particular relationship drains you, and they just don't get it? Because from the outside, nothing looks obviously wrong. There are no visible wounds, no dramatic incident to point to, just this quiet, steady feeling that has lived in your body for as long as you can remember. The feeling that you are never quite enough. That love here comes with conditions attached. That who you actually are, not the version of you that performs well at the family table, but the real you, is not fully welcome. Psychologists call this emotional invalidation. And the pattern it creates is not small. When the people who were supposed to make you feel safe consistently dismissed what you felt, minimized what you experienced, or made you feel like your needs were an inconvenience, something shifts in you at a fundamental level. It changes how you see yourself. It changes how safe you believe it is to need anything from anyone. It teaches you to make yourself smaller, to pre-apologize for taking up space, to assume that the discomfort in a room is probably your fault. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens the way a ceiling leak eventually takes out the entire floor, slowly, drop by drop, until one day you look around and realize the damage ran much deeper than you noticed. That's why people don't usually leave because something exploded. They leave because something slowly, quietly eroded everything underneath them. Now here's the part I really want you to hear. The part that doesn't get said enough. Even when you know a relationship was hurting you, it can still feel like you're the villain. That voice, the one that asks if you should have tried harder, forgiven faster, needed less. That voice is relentless. It shows up at the worst times, and I understand why people take it as evidence that they made the wrong choice. But here's the reframe. That guilt? That's not proof you made a mistake. It's proof that you cared. Deeply. People who don't care don't sit at strangers' tables wondering if they made the right call. They don't lose sleep. They don't replay conversations looking for the moment things could have gone differently. The guilt is love with nowhere left to go. It's not a verdict. It's a sign of how much you brought to something that couldn't hold it. And then there are others who reach a point where the guilt finally goes quiet, where they feel nothing when a certain name comes up. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. And that makes sense too. You can only extend your hand so many times before your arm stops reaching. Neither response makes you broken. Both of them make you human. Here's the thing that shifts everything when you really sit with it. Cutting off family is not the easy way out. There is no easy way out. Every option is painful. Staying is painful. Leaving is painful. The difference is the direction of the pain. Staying means absorbing it indefinitely. Leaving means enduring it acutely, up front, in a way you can eventually begin to move through. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, walking away is genuinely the most loving thing a person can do. Not just for themselves, but even for the people they're leaving. Because a relationship built entirely on resentment, obligation, and performance is not love. It is a contract. It's two people going through motions for the sake of appearances, and some contracts need to end before either person can actually begin to live. Think about that for a moment. There are people hearing this right now who have spent years, actual years, making themselves smaller to fit inside a family that was simply too small for who they actually are. And they've been told that's loyalty. That's love. That staying no matter what is the noble thing. But surviving something isn't the same as living. And staying in something that diminishes you isn't strength. It's just endurance. And you are allowed to want more than endurance. You are allowed to want a life where you feel like enough. Where your presence doesn't have to be earned or explained or justified. Where the people around you don't make you feel like the problem. The people who cut off their families are not cold. They are not dramatic. They are not selfish. They are people who loved, sometimes quietly, sometimes desperately, for a very long time. People who stayed long after they should have. People who gave chances that probably weren't deserved. And who, finally, after all of that, made the choice that the world told them they weren't allowed to make. They chose themselves. And if you understand, from somewhere deep and personal, just how hard that choice actually is, then you already know it wasn't easy. You know there was nothing dramatic or impulsive about it. You know it came at a cost that most people will never fully see. So wherever you are in this, whether you've already made this choice, and you're still carrying the weight of it, whether you're somewhere in the middle, still trying to figure out which way to go, whether someone you love made this choice, and you're trying to understand why. Know this: the grief is real, the guilt is real, the quiet relief, if it comes, that's real too. All of it gets to exist. None of it cancels the others out. You don't have to explain it perfectly for it to be true. You don't have to make everyone understand to deserve peace. And you don't have to keep choosing pain just because it's familiar. Some doors close not because love ran out, but because it finally had to find somewhere safe to land. And you are allowed to be that place. For yourself. First.